Well, hello all. Welcome to our Red Feather Mind, Body, Spirit event. I'm Christopher McClure. Today we have a very special guest, writer and scholar and creator Thea Wirsching, who's created most recently the American Renaissance Tarot. Check it out. It is gorgeous. Look at this beauty. Along with artist Celeste Pille, we wanted to catch up today to learn more about this groundbreaking deck and what's ahead. But first, a little background on Thea. Thea Wirsching is a writer, a scholar, an evolutionary astrologer based in Long Beach, California. Her PhD research at UCLA focused on occultism and American literature. Thea's counseling business, the Pluto Babe, is centered in trauma healing and shadow integration. She's passionate about bringing this shadow material forward to re-enchant the national narrative. Thea Wirsching received her doctorate in English literature from UCLA in 2012. UCLA is one of the nation's top institutions for literary studies. Her dissertation, entitled Occult Americans, Invisible Culture and the Literary Imagination, made a deep dive into the largely unexplored metaphysical history of the United States. Questions she sought to answer: what happened to occultism between the Renaissance and the occult revival of the late 19th century? Thea found her answer in this question to the question in the literature of the 19th century America. The Transcendentalists and other important writers of the American Renaissance resurrected the ancient philosophies of Hermeticism and Neoplatonism, foundational belief systems that underlie the modern New Age movement. Thea's great passion is to connect Americans with their metaphysical history as a way of healing the alienation and conflicted feelings that so many Americans have about their roots. For that reason, she's focused her efforts in recent years on the writing and co-creating of this beauty here with graphic artist Celeste Pille. So it's wonderful to have this time to talk with you here, Thea. You're such a wealth of knowledge, really, and I've been dying to have this conversation, really. So.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I'll just say, Schiffer REDFeather did such an amazing job. So I was quite moved by the appearance of the final project. It's very gorgeous. So
yeah, we're really pleased with it. Yeah, as you can all see, it's kind of like a little storybook in itself. And there's such a wonderful story to this. And I'm sure you have a wonderful story as well, Thea. So could you illuminate those who are watching about your background a little bit?
My background, yeah. So you covered it pretty well. So I do have a PhD in American literature, and I focused on the early portions of American literature. Mm-hmm. And I'm also an astrologer, and these are two things that people think don't go together. People are often very surprised. And I guess I would just say what's unusual about my background is that I think I have an equal expertise in both. I kind of have my counseling hat on when I'm an astrologer. I've been studying that since I was 15, and I have formal training in that as well. Mm-hmm. And actually, the whole reason I was in a PhD program to begin with, I was interested in studying the history of astrology and esoterica, and I found a little, I want to say like a little side route to doing that through academia, but it wasn't always very welcome. So, but I kind of played that to my advantage, I guess.
Right. So that was your ulterior motive in getting into the academia, like you wanted to really get in there and have life.
Yeah, I'll tell you a story. So as an undergrad, I was kind of waiting for this astrology college to open called Kepler College, and it kept not opening. And I thought, well, I'll just go to UCLA, I'll just get a degree. And I did a project on the writer Anais Nin. A lot of people say Anais Nin, that's how they'll recognize her. But she was actually really consumed with astrology. And so I just wrote this 80-page thesis. It didn't have to be 80 pages, but that's what I wanted to write. And it was about astrology and her writing. And I got an award at UCLA. And I thought, oh, wow. Okay, so the Academy accepts this. Maybe I could keep doing it. So yeah, that's part of my story, kind of shoehorning my way into the Academy studying these alternative topics.
Interesting. So it sounds like a lot of the American Renaissance Tarot kind of came out of your thesis then for your PhD then too, or some of it there. So how that kind of come together? What inspired you to then to actually make it like an actual tarot?
Yeah, I'll tell you the real story, which is that I started graduate school after having lived at an intentional community, a spiritual community. So that was a big shift, just going from this kind of spiritual focus to an academic focus. And in my first year, I hated it. It was all, contemporary theory. And I thought, what am I doing here? This is so bloodless. I hate it. And so I I had this moment of crisis in an Emerson seminar, actually, because I just didn't really vibe with the way Emerson was being taught, you know?
Okay.
And so I dropped out for a year and trained as an astrologer.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized like I still had this intellectual hunger that was not being met by my astrology career. So I said, I'm going to go back to graduate school, but I'm just going to study what I want to study. So no matter what was actually being taught, I thought, let me find the occult thread. Like, what is the interesting kind of esoteric background here
Mm-hmm.
for whatever text I was looking at? And so just over time, I gathered a big body of information, like too big to go into a dissertation, right? Because those are very specialized,
Sure.
but really just perfect for something like this project where I can give these little snippets of like, hey, did you know there's this interesting occult angle here? So
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. So for those who don't maybe know, could you maybe explain what the American Renaissance period is? I was thinking that you know, so it's
Yeah.
some put into a small box, like, you know, 1850s or so, but yours is a little more expansive as far as what you bring into it. Could you maybe explain like what that period is? That'd be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So like a lot of movements, it starts with a literary critic. Like we might not have a name for it until a critic comes along and gives it a name. So Matheson gave it the name American Renaissance and was talking about the years 1850 to 1855.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, this is the first flourishing of great American texts. And I think we kind of lose perspective because the 1850s seems like a million years ago, you know, but at that point, America wasn't even 100 years old. So I think Americans culturally had kind of an inferiority complex,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and they didn't feel like they had these great bards.
Mm-hmm.
And so at this time, when we have publications by Melville, Whitman, Hawthorne, Thoreau, and Emerson, it seems like, oh, wow, you know, it's like the nation is maturing and we have these storytellers that can speak to American character. But, you know, obviously that list is very small, that time period is very small. And so what happened is that literary professionals starting in the 1960s and 70s, kind of following on the civil rights movements and women's rights movements, we can also say, like, let's look back at the same time period and talk about how the best-selling novel of that period was by a woman, Harriet Beecher Stowe. And we can talk about how Frederick Douglass is an incredible writer, you know, and has such stirring rhetoric, but hasn't traditionally been taught in English departments, right? So that was the change that we start to see in the 1960s. And for me, the reason I expanded the period for this project is because I was really interested in Transcendentalism, which is so funky and so weird, and no one really knows what it is. And like I said, the way it was taught to me, I just didn't really vibrate with it, but it kind of when I made my own foray into it, I saw how esoteric it was and how experimental it was. And then everything kind of started to make sense. You know, I think we like to talk about it as such a sort of highbrow philosophical movement, but there's actually a lot of spiritual experimentation to it as well. So,
okay, yeah, thank you. So, so you mentioned that a lot of literature is markedly hermetic. So again, for those who might not understand what that is, and so how does that kind of like weave itself into like New Age spirituality and things?
Oh, it's such a great question. Yeah. So, you know, Emerson, this guy that I've had a rough time with, you know, kind of like understanding, having to wrestle with a lot. He has been so influential on the later New Thought movement, which is kind of like an end of the 19th century movement. And so I think that, you know, what is so interesting about Emerson, he's not a religious figure, and he had a religious background, right? He was a Unitarian minister. So he kind of was educated to that role of being a spiritual counselor, and yet he abandoned that tradition and just started speaking to Americans in terms of, you know, use your mind, reflect on your experience in Nature, which is kind of like the primary transcendentalist text, the book Nature. He talks about the power of the human mind to be all perceiving and also this ability to create your reality. And so those kinds of beliefs will start to sound familiar, I think, if you've ever kind of been in the New Age community. We have all these ideas, you know, kind of create your own reality or manifest or the power of attraction. And so, you know, what Emerson was doing was not that simplistic or watered down, but he definitely was the first person to get people to reflect on these ideas outside of a religious context. So he's kind of bringing in these ancient beliefs in a secular context. So,
Yeah. There's a quote from your book that I really like. It's the, well, I'm going to paraphrase it. It's cold ideas in the 19th century were delivered via the novel, which I think is a really interesting perspective, you know, on that. There is like it kind of seeped in without people actually knowing it, or there's just there, you know, and then they kind of blossom forth and become, as you mentioned, new thought and going into the different areas and stuff, and things really blossomed as far as occultism and that method of that philosophy, really.
yeah.
So quite interesting. So as far as with this is, so you had the idea then to make this tarot, and then you worked with a fine artist, you know. Celeste, what was it like working with an artist then to kind of like conceptualize and bring these ideas into fruition?
Wow, I don't know how to sum that up. I would say, you know, I want to make it really clear that, you know, they were my ideas, and then she was, you know, carrying them out.
Yeah.
And so I think that it was pretty painstaking because it, you know, it reminds me of the process of getting a tattoo, right? It's like you have something in your head and you have to try to communicate it to the artist, even though you're not the artist. So, I mean, I would just send her like 30 pictures of kind of image references.
Right.
And I think the most challenging part of our collaboration was trying to do justice to the historical period and get all the details right. And you know, a lot of it was about hair, which was funny because she was kind of doing hairstyles that would need an elastic band. And I was like, no, it's pins, you know, like,
Wow.
but she was just a gem to work with. I still can't believe I got so lucky to find her, someone who was interested in executing such a detailed and long-term project. So.
Awesome. So you asked a question in the book again, and again, the book is really comprehensive. It's a meaty, it's a pretty meaty book here. What do we have? Yeah, 240 pages. With the endnotes as well, I might add. You know, very very scholarly. I'm not surprised by that. So with this, you ask, is it tarot? So how does this become then a tarot? What makes So how do you bring it together?
Yeah, that's a good question. So like in my mind, there was never any doubt that it was tarot. So essentially what I was doing, you know, I got exposed to tarot. I mean, I had done it casually, but in 2007, I wound up going on a tarot intensive tour of Egypt, and Mary Greer was on that tour, and the tarot artist Julia Cuccia Watts was there. So it was just very influential on me. So, you know, at that time I got really immersed in tarot. And I think the major arcana are archetypes, right? And the minor arcana are more like these vignettes, you know, stories. They might show kind of a scene, you know, and you have to figure out which character you are in that scene. And so I think all I've done is just matched up those archetypes to literary figures. So for example, Thoreau, you know, he's very obviously a hermit. I mean, he went on a hermitage at Walden, right? So there were some very obvious choices like that. And then in the minor arcana, I just took scenes mostly from the Rider-Waite-Smith. You know, there's different tarot traditions, but Pamela Coleman Smith was pretty much the first person to draw these interesting vignettes instead of just using the numerical imagery, right? So a lot of my images kind of match up with the Rider-Waite-Smith tradition. And so you can read them either way, you know, it's like the story that I will link to that card to me just adds extra context. It's a way to just get a little deeper into the card and also learn about American literature at the same time. So.
Exactly. I think you really summed up tarot very well in as far as the majors having to do with basic philosophy. Then even we have that literary edge to that, and then the minors have to do more with the story too. So it really you have the literary angle throughout the entire work really. And each card is given very thorough treatment here. I mean, several pages on every card about the history. And how it weaves into tarot then in a reading and so forth. You got some great spreads in here as well. So some really interesting, unique spreads as well. Like consciousness as aware spread. I've never seen these spreads before actually. The consciousness as aware. The other I am for a 2 card. the walking one. So you can really just the Scarlet Letter, perfect.
Yeah,
So
my favorite is the Scarlet Letter because I thought, how can I devise a spread that will let me understand what someone else is thinking? So that's kind of what that spread's all about. Yeah.
wonderful. So within that too, you put a lot of thought into the suits. Could you explain like your thought process with how you broke down the minor
Sure.
the minor thing?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I mentioned already I'm an astrologer. So that's really kind of boilerplate, my esoteric training. And
Mm-hmm.
astrology is based on a system of 4 elements.
Mm-hmm.
And the tarot also traditionally matches up wands with fire, swords with air, cups with water,
Mm-hmm.
and earth with coins. And so I just really worked from that conceptual framework in coming up with the minor arcana suits. So we could talk about Edgar Allan Poe first. He's got a lot of stories about troubles and difficulties, and the sword suit and tarot skews more that way. It's like the suits are not all created equal. The swords is the suit of troubles. So
Right.
Poe's stories fit that, but he's also very intellectually ambitious and impressive person. And so he was very enamored of his mental faculties. And so we even went really conceptual on the king cards and the suit. So we put him in outer space to represent air and
Mm-hmm.
also the suit of swords.
Yeah.
And, if we move on to Hawthorne, it's a very different feel when you're reading Hawthorne's works. And it's almost like there's no plot and it's all symbols and it's all moods and feelings. And so that really matches up with the cup suit, which is about the heart. And then we also made Harriet Beecher Stowe our queen for that suit because her mission was really about getting people to have their heart in the right place,
Right.
to kind of amend their feelings.
Right.
And then let's see. So Melville winds up being king of the wand suit, and wands is about passion, sexuality, confidence, adventure.
Mm-hmm.
And Melville was a world traveler via his brief career as a sailor.
Mm-hmm.
And so he really kind of brings in this struggle with God. There's something about fire and spirit. That's kind of how Carl Jung dealt with that element when he incorporated the elements into his work. And then with the coin suit, we have Frederick Douglass as the king of coins. So the earth element in astrology is about mundane reality. It's about paying bills and, kind of like your day-to-day life, like work, health, and money. And so that's the suit of autobiography. And so the tales we feature there are about, African Americans kind of pulling themselves out of this enforced poverty and, gaining stability in American culture. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
That's amazing, and you can tie it in so many. It's very practical. It might seem like high-minded or high art or like beyond, but it's actually very practical. It's surprisingly practical, really, for anyone who really wants to get into like some deep meanings. And there is a lot of symbolism packed into the individual cards as well. So the instructions are. I just pulled up the Eight of Cups here. Just a beautiful image right there. That's the one that popped up here. Yeah, I'm not sure why, but that's
Interesting.
that's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
I appreciate the compliment that it's practical because I think that's something that I don't know. It's just sort of a reflection of who I am. I'm interested in esoterica, but if you can't make it work in the real world, I don't have as much interest in it. So
Right. Yeah. So I say that because someone might look at American Renaissance and how beautiful this is and say, oh man, I can't. No, I can't approach that, but you actually can. You can approach it and you can use it as well. So I think that's testament to what you've woven together and what you created here too, and the images and everything works beautifully together too.
yeah, I think that's a great compliment. I mean, because part of what I was trying to do is create a literary time machine, which is what I would try to do as a professor as well, right? It's like get my students to imagine another time. And when we find that it's actually relatable and we can see ourselves and our stories in people who lived in the 1850s, there's something very exciting about that to me. So
Exactly.
yeah.
So, and I know I'm sure you've had a lot of influences, and it might be kind of a loaded question, but who do you think has influenced you the most on your journey here? Either, scholarly journey or both, or can you?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Do you mean as far as making a tarot or just like combining like
I would say
many systems?
that's a good question back. Yeah, I would say maybe someone who's been instrumental in you having the courage even to create something like this. You know what that inspiration to pull this together and to really go forward with something that you're passionate about.
Oh, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I guess I'll just say that to me, this is something of a channeled text.
Mm.
So, the way I work as an astrologer,
Mm.
I will have the data of the information, on the chart in front of me, but I receive a lot of guidance in terms of what to say.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was, an awkward process to have to get used to, but I eventually figured out how to do that. And this project too, it was never like I set out consciously, I'm going to make a tarot deck. I received an image of it and it felt like a calling, and it felt like, well, I have to just fulfill this wonderful gift I've been given. I've, received this image of a complete tarot deck.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can't really explain why I've been so passionate to finish it, because it wasn't easy. It's a very, densely loaded product there. So yeah, I think probably because it was never about my own ego, I'll do this and it'll be so cool. It's like, oh no, it's, I was called to do this. I'm not sure why. And I'm curious to see why once it hits the world and people respond to it. And yeah.
No, I'm excited to see how what happens too, how it blossoms and all of that too. So that what your career process is like, or is it special in that regard? So,
I think this project is special just by virtue of the fact that I finished it, because I have so many ideas all the time and none of them have anything to do with each other. I'm Gemini rising, so I have a very difficult time figuring out where should I focus my energy? Should I do astrology? Should I do academia? So yeah, I know you wanted to find out kind of what I'm doing next, but the honest answer is I'm not sure. I'm really just curious to see how people respond to this project. And I did at another point receive a complete vision of another tarot, but I haven't really wanted to commit to it, because it's like once you're in that universe and it's got a hold of you, it just becomes an obsession. And that's sort of my creative process. It's like once I'm in it, I'm just down the rabbit hole. So
okay, that did. I was curious. Where do you go? Or just want like rest now for a moment. And almost within this, it's been a labor of love over so long. Sometimes it's good to take a breather, a breath, before then going into the next thing. But
I'm just interested in receiving, how people respond to the project and how it can facilitate their consciousness raising. And I was thinking about future projects and I was like, oh, I have this tarot deck idea, and then I have a literary reprints idea, and I have an astrology book idea. And then I still want to revisit this Anais Nin astrology combo project, which again would be, so all encompassing. So yeah, we'll see where the wheel of fortune turns on that one.
I have a bunch of things I want to get into, and it's like, oh, and then it's like a couple days for there and a couple days here, like that.
Yeah, and then in the meantime, you have to pay your rent and
there's
keep working, right? So yeah, I should say too, I make my living as an astrologer. I do have a lot of tarot clients, but it kind of waxes and wanes in terms of like the proportion of astrology to tarot, right? So it's like, oh, if I advertise, I'll do more tarot, and then it's more astrology, and it kind of goes like that. So I love that work. I don't see any stopping on that front. I'm excited to just read with the deck more. I'm hoping to have more tarot clients through this project and just and discover new ways for the cards to speak to me.
That's awesome. So yeah, now that answer my question. Now, do you read cards actually often then, or do you? What's your?
Yeah, I think like most tarot people, I read cards for myself at least once a day. Be embarrassed to tell you how much I probably actually read cards. At least might be more like 5 times a day. Sometimes I take breaks, but that's been going on since I was a teenager. I had different oracle decks, and so just been doing that for a long time. And I read for others as well, and that's always so much fun just to have the cards speak to me. And it's actually easier to read for other people than it is to read for yourself, because you're not kind of hoping for a particular outcome. and influencing the messages you get that way. So.
Hmm. Yeah. Would you find that daunting though? I find it daunting. I've done it myself. And it's just like, boy, it's important stuff. I mean, to get into, I don't take it lightly if I run it. For sure.
No, they can be very impactful. And I just in October did a whole month of the Angels and Demons tarot spread. That is the Edgar Allan Poe spread featured in the book. And it's about resolving trauma. That was a really intense month, I mean, and it's really a sacred position that someone is putting you in, asking you to kind of go into their underworld and treat it with kindness and compassion. And so I take that very seriously. And I also love doing that work. That's why my astrology business is called the Pluto Babe, because I tend to just always dive right into the shadow. I'm just comfortable there. So.
Yeah. I was thinking about that. That's the heavy stuff. Give yourself that. That's kind of the heavy stuff there.
Yeah.
So but
I mean, it's cool. It's heavy stuff. Yes. Like it can be trauma, but Pluto's also the planet of magic and sorcery. And so, what I found researching this in academia, there's so much taboo around that, right? Because this idea of having personal power, and if you tell someone, oh, I'm a magician, or I do have control over my destiny, or I'm going to manifest these things, people are kind of like, wait, no, you can't do that. And so just this idea of the human potential movement can be very challenging to people, brings up all these taboos around our own limitations. So I think of Pluto that way as well. Like it's scary because it's so powerful, it's so profound.
Yeah, that is profound. And there's some profound quotes in here, if you indulge me, from the book itself. I really got a lot out of reading the book. I mean, it's just so, the book, it's a history lesson in itself. You don't even have, the parts are great and they're very useful, but the book itself, too, is really almost is like a literature and history lesson too. Something I read in here, I really like. It invites the readers to experience the transformation in consciousness through the believer, through engagement with the iconic literature. So I think it's really important to that engagement, with the literature, to really understand how transformative it can be. And it's kind of like an ideological union of the magical power of writing with the magical system of tarot. So it kind of weaves things together, which I think beautifully sums up, what you're doing. Oh, and this one. So this is one I really like. I might actually. So the act of literary creation awakens the imaginal realm, and that this potent creativity is strongly linked to religious experience and altered states of consciousness. That's really amazing. So that also kind of explains what was happening and kind of relates back to what I mentioned before. The occult ideas through novelization and those kinds of things, how it kind of like just seeps in there and then can become more ingrained in the person too. It's not like, oh, you have to study this thing, learn this thing. It just kind of becomes throughout the reading.
Yeah, I love all that. And I think what you've pinpointed there is kind of the reason I had the difficulty in academia, because it's sort of like the words are just supposed to stay on the page. They're not supposed to get in your head and transform things.
Right.
And I would just refer to the work of Jeffrey Kripal, who I quote a lot in the book. So he's a religion professor, and he writes a lot about this, about how writing and reading are both these magical acts. And when you're reading the words of a writer, maybe even if it's 200 years ago that they wrote this text, it's kind of like their spirit is reaching out and communicating with you. And I'm being metaphorical here, but there's this kind of like fusion with that person's mind, and it is an occult state, right? It's like when you're just receiving someone else's message from whatever time. Yeah,
exactly. So what would you like people really to gain from using the American Renaissance Tarot? What is the net benefit?
Yeah, it's a big question because the project is, pretty dense. So it's not just doing one thing. I'll just share, I think what was healing for me about studying American history and literature, I really felt like I didn't belong to a culture, or I didn't have ancestors. I just felt kind of like an American mutt, and I didn't have, a lot of respect for my culture at all. And I was searching for that, I was hungry for that. And so I did find it in these American writers. I could just think of someone who's not in the book, Charles Brockden Brown. He's a really early American writer in the 1790s, but I love him so much. I revere him. I've just learned so much from reading his text. So I think this project was a way for me to find adopted ancestors and find Americans that I could be proud of. Mm-hmm. And I think, there's obviously a lot of political division in this country. Mm-hmm. And I think it has become fashionable for, people on the left, like me, I'm on the left, to just look back and hate everything and say everything was horrible, and everything was a monster and everyone was a monster and there's nothing to look back to that's positive. Mm-hmm. And so this project is doing a difficult thing of saying, okay, let's hold that, let's hold those traumas. Let's not cover them over. But let's also understand that there was a lot of positive things that happened too. There was beauty and creativity and this interesting metaphysical movement. And there's all kinds of things we can look back to and say, I like that. I like that about America and American history. So it's trying to give people, it's just so great, the back cover material, enchant your sense of the American past is the other piece of it. Mm-hmm. And I'll share a story, having spoken with a Shakespeare professor at one time and saying, oh, well, everyone knew that Shakespeare's era was enchanted. So she was writing a book about an astrologer who lived in Shakespeare's day. And she said, well, that's not true at all. And she mentioned some books by Francis Yates and Keats Thomas. And she said, oh, it took these writers to enchant our idea of the English past, the early modern era in England, which was filled with alchemists and mm-hmm. soothsayers and herb women and things like that. Mm-hmm. And I want people to have that sense of America as well. We tend to look back and just think, oh, it was the dour Puritan, time or the evangelical time. But America is very spiritually experimental. And it has never been unilaterally Christian. So there's just a very rich pagan texture there if you want to look back and find it. So yeah, I'm hoping people will feel a little more enchanted with America.
That's a good goal. Good goal.
Yeah.
Now we have a little time here. Would you mind if we pulled a card and maybe did?
That's fine. Sure. Yeah. I was thinking, maybe just one card.
Yes, one card is enough, I think, really. Since there's so much symbolism and things. I'll let you. Should I pull it or should you pull? What do you think?
I wasn't sure what you wanted to do. I have the deck right here.
Okay.
So I can do it.
You can do it. Yeah. Let the creator do it. And what are we trying to discern?
Do we have a question? Yeah. My question is, what would people most like to hear from me, as the creator about this project? What do they want to know about me that hasn't been covered today? What do you think? Or should we make it more about the audience?
Well, I would say that that's what can be revealed for someone using this deck. What can be revealed personally when someone uses this deck? So that's maybe different for different people, but in general, if someone's going to be using this deck.
It's the Missionary of Swords.
Okay.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. So this corresponds to the Knight of Swords in the Rider-Waite Smith deck. And it's actually, I like it. We kind of made this character, Rufus Griswold, a bad guy in the project because he was kind of like Edgar Allan Poe's nemesis, But as I think about it, this card makes perfect sense for the question because this guy we profiled, Rufus Griswold, even though he's kind of a negative character in Edgar Allan Poe's life, his unique contribution to American literature was as an anthologizer. And so he took great pains to publish, I think it was the Poets and Poetry of America. And so it was the first anthology of its kind where he said, I'm just gonna grab poetry from all over the country and produce it in these anthologies. And he went on to produce more anthologies. I think he also did short fiction, but I could be wrong about that. But this was how he made his name, right? This Poets and Poetry of America. And, I do feel kind of like a similar impulse to Griswold in the sense that I want to give people the range, the scope of what American literature was. And so, there's kind of pulp novel level stuff in there. And then there's this highbrow transcendentalism stuff. And then there's women's fiction and, poetry about technology. So it's, it's kind of all over the place. And the Knight of Swords, we made that the Gemini card. So this is a very Gemini endeavor, right? It's like, I want to just get the whole field of experience, not specializing. It's this kind of like Reader's Digest version of American literature.
Right.
And the Knight is the extreme position of the court cards. So it's this kind of exaggeration of a characteristic. And the sword suit corresponds to air, which is the life of the mind. Okay. So, kind of exaggerating, like, to me, just the immense quantity of data that is in this project, right? So in terms of what people can expect to get out of the deck, it functions perfectly well as a tarot deck, like you've said. But my hope, something I was hoping people would gain is that they would discover a new writer, that they discover an archival writer like Elizabeth Stoddard, this amazing, feminist novelist from the mid-19th century, and just be taken on that particular journey, if they're not able to do a literary PhD like I was, right? So you can kind of get this whole broad education in miniature. So this card, where did I put it? I put it back in the deck here. There we go. This guy. It's kind of like a whole, literary degree coming at you through the tarot. So I think that's what you can expect.
I think it's a perfect card for exactly for what we were asking there. So that's great. Thank you. I know that's kind of puts you on the spot, but
no, it's funny. Because I am so intense in my practice. I really like to read for that one individual. And so this kind of like a general reading thing is not my strong suit, so that was the right card.
It was a plum. Thank you. So speaking of interacting, so now are you on social media? Can readers interact with you and followers and things?
Absolutely. So I have an Instagram account for the project. It's called American Tarot. Is how you can find us on Instagram. And I'm open to exploring other platforms, just kind of seeing, again, how people respond to it. So I believe it was last year I taught a small occult literature class, and we looked at esoteric texts from the 19th century. It was a blast. It was so much fun. So I'm hoping to do that again, just once people experience the deck, if they're interested in learning more about these texts. That might be a Mighty Network kind of experience, another platform. We'll just see where it goes. So
where it goes. All right.
Yeah.
Well, it's been lovely chatting with you here, and I'm super excited about the deck. It's finally here. It seems like it took forever to get here, but I'm so thankful it's here.
And I should say, it's the deck's right on time for America's Pluto return. This is the first time it's ever happened. It's taken Pluto this long to get back to its natal place. So I think there's a magic to the timing as well.
I think so too. Actually, great. So it's been magical talking with you. And thanks for everybody who watched is watching this or will watch it. American Renaissance Tarot is available on REDFeatherMBS.com and ShiverBooks.com and all over wherever you want to get your decks and books. Also your trade shops as well. So so pick it up, check it out, and it's literature course in a box and tarot all woven together. So thanks everybody. So have a beautiful day.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.